The failed deal spelled the end for the 4 local businessmen who'd arrived at Longbridge as heroes. Previous owners, BMW, were on the verge of closing the loss-making plant when the so-called Phoenix 4 stepped in. They paid just £10 for it and were seen as saviours.
When they took over the organisation, it was fantastic. And I moved there along with lots of other people that didn't know whether we'd got jobs or managers or what we were doing. But basically, I was amazed by the place. The place has got an amazing atmosphere.
I can remember standing in the room at Longbridge, the huge press conference when John Towers and the other members of the Phoenix Consortium came to the factory to sort of say, we've done it, we've bought it, we've paid the £10 sort of thing. And I think all of us standing there were saying, yeah, great, good on you, well done. And there was huge, almost hysteria on the lines that, you know, it was going to be okay now. But I think at the back of our minds we were thinking, but what's going to happen in the future?
But who exactly were the Phoenix 4, and how qualified were they to run such an important British car company? Who better to tell us than those on the inside? This man headed MG Rover's Shanghai team during the last 6 months.
Nick Stevenson was an engineer at Rover for years, and for what I know, he was a good engineer, but he's not a businessman. He's a nice guy who likes fast cars. The faster, the better. A total petrolhead.
This man went from running the car showroom set up by his father to promoting MG Rover worldwide.
His heart was absolutely in the MG and Rover business. You know, I think this disaster which we've seen has actually probably affected him harder than the others because he did have such a passion for it.
Our third Phoenix had probably the lowest profile.
Peter Beale was John Edwards' accountant at Stratford-on-Avon, and a good friend of his. He was the money man.
But the fourth was the consortium's public face, the man on whom the workers' hopes rested.
John Towers was the front man. He'd been a senior executive at Rover before, so he was probably the most qualified. But in the 5 years I was there, Towers wasn't around very much.
He was the most experienced of the 4, and when the chairman did turn up, he could play a blinding round.
John Towers we didn't see a lot of. When we did, he was a very incisive thinker, actually. He would come to some board meetings and he'd listen to all kinds of ramblings on and explanations and things, and he could cut right to the real heart of a problem and say, you know, yes, but why the hell are we doing that?
Former colleagues have told us the new bosses referred to themselves as 4 Brummies with an overdraft. And there was soon another member. Kevin Howe was made chief executive to run the company day to day. The Phoenix 4 became 5.
He's immaculate, the opposite to John Edwards. Not a hair out of place person. He had a very aggressive reputation in the factory. He'd run the production line at Rover for years.
The team had a famous brand and a shed-load of money. They hadn't just bought Longbridge for a tenner. BMW also handed them more than £1 billion in cash and assets. But they'd bought a loss-making plant with too many workers and a history of producing bad cars, and little time to work out how they'd turn it round.
They didn't have weeks or months. They had hours. They walked in, they had no plan, they had no strategy, and they had no idea of how on earth they were going to turn it into a viable business.
John Moulton was a rival bidder for Rover. His plans would have cost 5,000 jobs.
Longbridge will be reduced in size but not closed.
When Phoenix pledged to save those jobs, he was certain they were doomed.
I would have given it 100 to 1 against and taken any bet at that level. And it's not very satisfying to say so. They were pursuing a hopeless business strategy. Mass market producer, smallest plant in Europe, obsolete models, weak distribution. And it just didn't hang together. They hadn't got a chance.
Experts were convinced there was only one way to save MG Rover, and that was to spend the money BMW had left them to come up with better cars.
They desperately needed to develop new models. This is life and death. So every last asset, every last ounce of resource needs to be put into developing models.
Who wants to be a millionaire?
I don't
have flashy.
But development costs money, lots of it. BMW may have left them $1 billion plus, but in the car world that's a raindrop in an ocean. So instead of coming up with the new cars, they redesigned the old. There was some clever facelifting of the 25, 45 and 75 models. Then Rovers were transformed into sexy MGs. Yesterday's lunch had been nicely reheated for today's breakfast. Recycled even.
We became known as the world champions of recycling vehicles.
Brian Miles's design studio got used to working miracles with a budget more suited to loaves and fishes.
We had ideas which were beyond the budgets at that time for Rover. Metalwork could not be changed, so we were adding on plastic parts, new bumpers, new trim, some new interior parts. So we prettied the vehicles up on a very small budget.
There were signs of chaos on the production line as supply orders changed day by day.
We were asked to produce a new bumper. We were told at the beginning that they wanted 5 bumpers per week, and within a few weeks this went to 200 a week. If there was a plan, I don't know how many people were actually working to it.
Simply revamping old models did nothing for the company's overall sales figures. They were still losing money and their £1 billion was dwindling fast. If MG Rover was to survive long term, it couldn't do it alone.
It cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds to develop one car, never mind a whole range. So their task was huge. What it needed was a partner, and it needed a partner very quickly. That takes some finding.
So the Phoenix 5 clearly knew they needed someone else's money to help bankroll the future of MG Rover. So you would have thought they'd spend all their time and energy finding that crucial, life-saving partnership. Well, actually, no. 6 months after the takeover, they decided to go racing.